If you're going to make any sort of proper application, which you're going to expect the user to sit down in front of and do any real amount of work, it's likely that you're going to want to have things like windows with buttons, maybe some other information displayed. So let's have a look at how we can create something like that. Frames are what Java calls the individual windows. We're going to be using a variation called a JFrame, but as with most things in Java, there are alternatives too. As you can see, we set the properties for the JFrame using an initialization class. In the initialization class, the first thing we have is a new instance of the JFrame class, which is a subclass built into Java's Swing library. You can see that we import Swing at the top. You can see that we also set the title of the panel here too. We then have some other options like set size, add window listener, and set visible. These are all methods from within the JFrame class, and so we access them accordingly. Set size should be self-explanatory. It just sets the size of the frame in pixels. One thing to be aware of is the fact that it's possible to set the size in something bigger than your monitor can display, and this might mean that you have problems lining things up later on. Next we have an event which eventually stops your program running when you close the frame. If you're going to have lots of frames, you probably aren't going to want to close the entire program every time you close any of the frames, so Java doesn't exit the program until you specifically tell it to do so. Set visible shows the user the frame. It's hidden from the user by default. The idea is that you set up all of the buttons etc. for the frame before you show anything to the user, rather than showing little pieces of the frame to the user as you're adding the buttons progressively. If you were to run this code, you would get a blank window like this. So speaking of adding buttons, what do we need to do to make our frame a little more interactive like this? The first thing to mention is that you should probably split the code I have used up into smaller methods, but I want to show it all at once for ease. So after the bulk of the code for the frame, and before setting the frame to visible, we're going to add a few things. The first thing we're going to add is a layout manager, and this is added to the JFrame. A layout manager more or less takes care of where all the things we add to the frame will be positioned. You could do this manually on a per element basis too, or you could use one of the other layout managers if they suit your needs better. I'm using the flow layout manager, which just places the contents of whatever you're creating in the center and align to the top. If there's not enough space, it will start on the next line. The other main manager is called Grid Layout. With the Grid Layout Manager, you split the frame up into a certain number of areas, which you can add things to separately. The next thing I have added is a JPanel, which I have also assigned to the Flow Layout Manager, and so this is then added to the frame. This isn't really useful in this instance because we're not using it to do anything special, but I wanted to demonstrate how to add panels while we're looking at this. Panels are useful if you separate your buttons out into different areas, for example, especially if you're using Grid Layout Manager for the frame, because it helps you manage each of the sections individually. Finally, we have the code specific to the button. In this instance, we are creating a button which says clicky, and so we just add the title when we are instantiating our button as a parameter. It's then just a matter of adding that button to the panel and adding an event that will trigger whenever you click the button. In this case, I've just output a message to the console, but you can call other methods or do anything else you want to here.